Time now for our rants and raves, starting with you, Dan.
I have a rave for the Great and General Court and for Governor Charlie Baker. We have been talking about this for over a year. Finally, Governor Baker has signed into law legislation reforming Massachusetts' terrible public records law. There are many aspects to it, but by far the most important one is that finally, if you bring a lawsuit to release public records that the government doesn't want to release and you win, the government agency has to pay your legal fees. The single biggest problem with the law as it stood was that there were absolutely no consequences for breaking it.
I know, and there's still some parameters about law enforcement and all that. So.
It's not perfect, but it's a lot closer to being a good law than it used to be.
Okay, Kelly.
Well, I have a rave, and this is a tough rave because it was a tough subject. You might recall that the sports website SB Nation, which is part of Vox, published this article, which they later had to retract, about Daniel Holtzclaw. If people don't remember that name, this was a guy who was a Oklahoma City police officer, had once been a storied football player, high school and college, and he was sentenced to 263 years in prison for sexual crimes that were just beyond horrific. So now with that, this guy wrote this profile of him that was so empathetic that people lost their minds and said, are you kidding? You know, did you miss the point about this guy? So they went back and did an audit. You know, how did it get to this far? What mistakes did we make? And this is what I think, it may be the first news organization to say this out loud. If there is one key, unmistakable takeaway from the Holtzclaw story, it is that an organization cannot afford to wait to be diverse. Director Spencer Hall said of the site's lack of diversity exposed blind spots. And in addition to that,
Was the guy white or black?
the guy is
the guy who committed the crimes.
The guy who committed the crimes is Asian,
okay.
but all of the victims were black.
Okay.
And so the way that the victims were described were troubled.
I see.
Okay, and this guy, 263 years, you know he did some stuff. And it was just a ridiculous kind of thing. So they went back and said, all along the way, our lack of diversity covered up spaces, and in addition to that, it wasn't bad enough. We then asked the women, the highest ranking women, to take on all of the sensitivity issues around gender, and that's not fair, as if the rest of us aren't supposed to do it. Now, this is from a place right now that is 87% white and male, so I think bravo to them, faced it, and made it public.
All right. Good. Joanna.
So I have a rant against much of the media. As you may have heard, a boy fell into a gorilla enclosure last weekend at the Cincinnati Zoo. Seemed like there was a lot of opportunity after that boy was rescued and the gorilla was shot for some watchdog journalism, some big questions to answer. How can a boy fall through an enclosure? How does a zoo with that kind of enclosure get accreditation? What's going on with trends in zoos and accreditation process? Instead, much of the press followed the mob that sets up a change.org petition and takes out the pitchforks and tries to attack the family, and so much of the coverage was about attacking the mother as opposed to asking the really big, larger questions. Worst offender, the Daily Mail, which then dug up the father's criminal record. The father wasn't even there. So it was just like putting this family through shame and a show trial instead of actually doing some journalism.
Yeah, an African-American mother, too, by the way.
Yeah,
That's terrible.
All right, John.
Well, I have a rave surrounding the disclosure this week, the admission by the State Department that they went back and cut out a portion of the routine videotape of a State Department press conference at which James Rosen of Fox News was accurately questioning the State Department spokeswoman, or spokesperson, I guess, about back-channel communication between the administration and the mullahs in Iran, which ultimately led up to the arms deal. And they stonewalled, lied, however you want to put it. They didn't like the exchange, so they edited it out, but then denied that they had edited it out. So my rave is for Rosen for pressing it, but also for Jake Tapper, who went on CNN as this story came out this week and said, you know, this isn't over with. First of all, kudos to Fox for doing what they did, and we still need to know who did this. You can't get away without identifying the perp and punishing the perp. So
right.
kudos all around.
Thanks. I don't have time for mine.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We'll save it. It was a good one, too. All
darn
right,
it.
that's it for our show. Tell us what you think. Email us, tweet us, or leave a comment. We're always on at beatthepress.org.